and they didn't even bother to send a statement. I think that sums up Thames Water perfectly for me, anyway. Let's talk to Ashok Kumar now, who's an Associate Professor of Political Economy at the Birkbeck University. Ashok, a very good evening to you.
Good evening, Patrick.
I mean, look, if they're not even going to put people up or send a statement, I mean, that to me feels like this is a company with very little regard for the customers it serves.
Yeah, look, why would they send anyone? We don't have a choice. They're a natural monopoly. Yeah. They don't care. We don't get to choose who the water provider is. They are imposed on us. They can increase fares as long as, off what the regulator allows them to. They've increased it, at an extortionate level since 1989, since it became privatized. The reason why these CEOs are rewarded, whether it's at Severn Trent, another water company where the CEO got a golden parachute a month ago, whether it's here at Thames Water, the reason why they're given these bonuses is because they're doing exactly what the company wants them to do, which is they're fiduciary responsible first and foremost to their shareholders. They're providing them dividends. They're borrowing to the hilt. They're allowing their entire infrastructure to become deteriorated. They're pouring sewage. I mean, if you take Thames Water just as an example, just until 2020, I mean, this might be much more even now, they poured 8 tons of sewage into the Thames River alone. So they're being rewarded for that. They're not being rewarded for how much they treat the customers or how much they're treating the public health, which is a public health epidemic right now. If you look at what happened in Devon, which you're looking at what happens in other parts of the country because of the sewage that's gone into the water and it's gone into the drinking water, and that's directly related to the privatization of water. There is only one thing that the CEO is responsible for in these companies, and it's profits and it's dividends. And they're doing it by borrowing. There was a great study out of Greenwich that looked at the 9 privatized companies, and they proved that they borrowed $48 billion. They paid out $57 billion in dividends, almost exactly the amount that they borrowed, which in 1989 they had no debt. Now they have tens of billions in debt. And every cent that was taken from people's the amount they paid for the water was paid towards infrastructure, except for 25%, which was paid just to pay off the debt, which was just last year alone, the interest on the debt on water companies was $1.3 billion. So it's a complete, it's infuriating, and that's the only reaction you should have to what's happening. I mean,
Ashok, it is absolutely mind-blowing to me. As you said, it was privatized in 1989. It had no debt at that time. It was sold off without debt. There was debt, but we swallowed that debt, right? But I cannot believe that there was a new rule only introduced last year, so this is since 1989, that they've owned it, that water companies with poor financial and environmental records are not allowed to pay dividends. The idea that you can borrow money to pay dividends, surely that should be illegal. I mean, that makes no sense. Dividends are usually paid out on profit, they're paid out on performance. How come they're allowed just to borrow it and just give it away?
Well, look, this law that came in March 2023, it's in the kind of realm of off-let, and it's whether the regulator chooses to use the Environmental Act of 2021 to actually enforce that. These companies are still borrowing and still paying off dividends whilst you have this deteriorating infrastructure and sewage in the waterway. So how is that even being enforced? There's no real evidence that even that, fairly modest reform that happened only a year ago that put some limits on the unfettered greed of these companies is not even really being enforced. There's no evidence that it's being enforced. Sure, certainly not at Thames Water.
As you said, this is Ofwat. I mean, if ever there was a paper tiger, then it is Ofwat. And tomorrow, Ofwat is going to determine whether mine and your water bill goes up by 56 to 57% to fill in the holes that Thames Water's had all this money and hasn't done that with. And what they're saying is that we need this money. If we don't get this money, we're going to run out of cash next May. And it's too big to fail. What do we as the taxpayers have to do if this fails? We have to pick up the bill.
Well, firstly, what needs to happen is they have to, take Nationalise Water. I mean, that's just, if you look at the polling, 89–90% of the public for the last 10–15 years has supported nationalizing water. It's not a radical demand. It's broadly supported. Unfortunately, the two major parties, the Tories and the Labour Party, do not support it because there's existing rent-seeking constituencies of private water companies and CEOs and who knows what the reason is? I mean, we know what the kind of dark money reason might be. Not in the public interest. I mean, if you look at Scotland, for example, the publicly owned Scottish company, Scottish Water, they don't pay their CEOs, 13 million pounds in bonuses, which you saw happen just last year. They don't have astronomical cost for water. It's actually 15% less than it is here, and 35p from every pound that's given to Scottish Water goes into infrastructure. They're not spilling sewage into their waterways and into their rivers. So that's a real life case study of what the difference between a private for-profit natural monopoly in water does throughout society, which is nothing good has happened because of that, and a system where you're actually trying to get people water and not profit from that. That seems like a logical thing. You don't have to be a communist or a socialist to believe that should be in the public interest.
No, quite. But Labour has already said they have no interest in stepping in. And look, we've seen before the taxpayer having to step in to support a privately owned enterprise, and that was a bank. That was when the banking crisis happened, because they were considered, again, too big to fail. Thames Water has got 16 million customers. It is too big to fail. So either they're threatening us, they're blackmailing us, saying, look, unless we can put the bills up by 56%, we're going to fail and the taxpayer will have to pick it all up. Ofwat may bend to that and allow them to put this money up. And myself and other customers are like, well, this is not on. You're giving out these massive bonuses, that you're paying these huge dividends. Why do we have to pick up the bill? And this seems to happen a lot with these private companies.
Yeah, actually, it's very simple. I mean, in an ideal world, they would just expropriate it. They have no right to say, oh, we're going to dangle this in front of and threaten and blackmail the public. But what you do is you say, fine, file for bankruptcy, then we'll buy it back. The state will buy it back for pennies on the pound, and then it'll be in the public's interest. This threat means that we never solve it. It's a Band-Aid that costs the public an astronomical amount of money, every single customer, and we don't solve the problem. The problem is at its root about profit. That's the problem. And that's why you've seen this endemic issue happen with public health, happen with sewage, happen with the cost and bankruptcy, happen with debt. Those things are endemic, and it fundamentally is about privatization.
Well, it clearly doesn't work in the public interest then. But I mean, can Ofwat, for example, is it within their power to say you must not pay bonuses, you must not pay dividends, you must not pay this sort of salary if we're going to allow you to put these bills up? Can they ring fence if we do have to pay 56% more, which I think is an absolute disgrace because they're the ones that blew the money, not us? Can Ofwat, does it have the power to say no more, this is no more free lunch for you?
Yes, according to the expanded powers of the Environmental Act 2021, because of the law that was passed, or the expanded regulatory power that was passed in March 2023, Ofwat can put a halt on dividends if environmental performance aren't met, if customer delivery hasn't been met. But there's very little evidence that they are taking those measures, because we haven't seen that, certainly not in the case of Thames Water. And secondly, that still doesn't solve the actual problem of, you put caps on dividends now, they still have a mental structural problem of indebtedness that they're having to pay off, which is they went into debt to pay these shareholders. That's why they went into debt. The debt was simply they borrowed money and transferred that money from public hands through the hands of the shareholders. It's really that simple. They deny it, but the preponderance of evidence is overwhelming for that. And the Greenwich study proves it.
And yet it seems that it always comes back on us. Let me point to the post office, right? The whole Horizon issue there, where £3 million worth of bonus were paid to Paula Venables and for introducing Horizon and for smoothing the path or whatever it was. She's never paid a penny of that back. Then we get to those poor people who were victimised and punished and imprisoned for doing nothing wrong. Who's going to pick up the bill for the compensation? You and me, the taxpayer, because these companies, it seems to me, Ashok, that these companies can do what the hell they like at any point with our money, and yet when it goes wrong, it's like the NHS, like with the blood scandal. When that goes wrong, who picks up the bill? Not them, not the individuals, you and me. And that's what's so wrong about whatever's going on.
It's a clear case of socializing risk and privatizing profits. We see that with the train operators.
Yeah,
when they go on strike, they get indemnified from any of the costs. The government indemnified them from any of the costs. But when it was profits, £500,000 in 2021 to 22, £500 million rather, 2021 to 22, the 9 operators, that's all profit. When it comes to wage suppression, when it comes to the fact that the price of going on a train in this country is astronomical compared to the rest of continental Europe, has gone up, 20, 25% in the last 12 years, that's all profit. So the same you'll see in the NHS, the same you see with water companies, the same you see in energy companies. Privatization is basically a form of legalized corruption. That money that should be staying in the public hands for the public good ends up being siphoned off to who knows where, another few zeros in a Cayman Island account. So I just think this is proven time and time again. There is no case that I can see of natural monopolies being privatized that don't hurt the public in one way or another.
The thing is that when look, governments are rubbish at running things, right? We know that. They can barely run parliament. So the problem was with the railways when they were nationalised, when they were national, they didn't run them. They didn't do it very well.
They're bad at running things fine. I'll give you that, because they don't have this underlying, what Adam Smith and Marx and others call law of motion of competition. So when you have competition, what competition allows you to do, and I'll admit this, is it makes people's services better because they can choose and move somewhere else. It makes people provide cheaper services. There's some incentive to do that. There's nothing inherent in a businessman or a business person or a CEO or a shareholder running a business that runs it more efficiently than government or runs it better than government. What allows for that is competition. Sure, admittedly, that's the case. In a situation where you have no competition, they not only run it poorly, they siphon out the money. At least the government's running it kind of inefficiently and whatever.
Yeah,
they're not siphoning off billions and borrowing billions off the public dime.
Ashok, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Let's do it again soon. I really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.